Hello, everyone, and welcome to our very first podcast here, Bridging the Gap. I'm myself, Andrew Nicastro, a family member of a veteran, David Nicastro, veteran for over 18 years, right?
Yeah, 23 years of some semblance of a uniform, yeah.
And Adam Kukru. How long were you serving, Adam?
I was in for 4 years.
For 4 years?
In the Marine Corps, yeah.
Yeah. And I reached out to Adam with this idea because it's really important that we tell the stories of veterans. And Adam came right in, my brother came right in, and within a couple of days, we had a mission for what this podcast is going to be. And the mission of this podcast is to quiet the stigma of PTSD and mental illness while providing compassion and empathy for the life of a veteran. And that's where we start. So, Dave, why don't you start by just giving us your background as a veteran that served for our military.
I went into the Marines at 17 years old, and for those of us who go in that young, you need both parents' signature. So that's what I needed. The school thing wasn't working out for me, just the way my mind was, and with a kid that was ADHD, and people struggled to understand how to guide me in the right way. Man, was the Marine Corps the right fit for this guy and his brain? So I found myself in the Marines. I wanted to be a grunt. I wanted to be infantry. I wanted to carry a gun for a living. Just that's where my mind was, and that's what I did. So into the Marine Corps, it's just called an 0311. You can see my hat with my EGA right there. Did my infantry training, did everything, and then I went security forces route, which just means for the first few years of your career, I would have been guarding nuclear weapons at undisclosed locations around the country. While in my school, I remember this man coming down. We didn't know who he was, but he was just taking note of our class, and he pulled a few of us aside and said, "This is an anti-terrorism unit we're starting up called FAST Company, Fleet Anti-Terrorism Security Team Company. And once you graduate this school, we'd like you guys to come to our unit." So we could have chosen to stay there at security forces and go on to guard nuclear weapons, which sounds pretty cool, or come to this anti-terrorism unit we're not going to tell you much about, and you don't know what exactly you're going to do. And that sounded awesome to me. So I found myself going to Yorktown, Virginia, where they were establishing an anti-terrorism unit. They already had one established. This was the second one. So for 2 years, from the age of 17 to 19, I was being trained as an anti-terrorism Marine. And I found myself at 19 years old, deployed to the Middle East for my first mission, which was being involved in the American embassy bombing in Nairobi, Kenya. And again, that was kind of my introduction into a combat situation. Although it wasn't a war and it wasn't considered combat, there's death and destruction everywhere. And I was there for 70 days, and it was really hard. And I just remember attempting to get rest in that while you're on mission in a combat zone. You just get it when you can, or when you're allowed to step out of that role. And I'm just laying on a blown-up embassy floor. You're looking up, and there's no windows. Hundreds of people had already been killed, and 4,000 instantly injured. And you're seeing just everything. It's catastrophic. And I just couldn't get the sounds out of my head. I'm still hearing our radio, and still hearing the people in the rubble and just everything. But they're saying, you got to get rest. We're going to be here a while. We don't know how long we're going to be here. That was really hard. And there's nowhere to process that. And so my life continued as that in my anti-terrorism unit. I was doing anti-terrorism for 7 years. 7 years, yeah.
You know, so you're roughly 10 years older than me, give or take.
Yeah.
I remember at 9, 10 years old, I didn't know exactly what you were doing, obviously, but I just remember the environment of the house, the energy of the house. Our mom, Laura Figueredo, who's an absolute saint.
Love you, Mom.
Yeah. Shout out, Mom. But just the energy in the house, it was palpable that you were in a dangerous place.
Yeah.
Even though I had no idea really. I knew you were in Kenya, but I just knew, so.
What's amazing is Adam remembers there was no email, there was no cell phone, there was no texting. I had to actually write a physical letter with a pencil, put a stamp on it, and it was like for America, and it had all the fittings of Taliban, Afghanistan, where the terrorists were being trained. So we were being trained up on Osama bin Laden and terrorism for a long time. We knew his name, we knew who they were, and they just hit us. So again, these were just little jabs by terrorist organizations that we would later, again, come face to face with.
And I can assume that phone call home, right? It wasn't at like 4 o'clock in the afternoon, noon time. This was probably a 3 o'clock in the morning time kind of call.
Absolutely.
And, you know, for our parents that are here while their children are gone, and, you know, that's kind of scary to think about. You know, this is a good call, a bad call, or a call I'm not going to answer, but they're going to answer it because they have children that are deployed somewhere.
Yeah.
And this could be them calling off some random number. I don't know what it says, if there was caller ID at that time,
Right.
or what
Yeah.
it said, just
What is
a
it?
random call.
Yeah.
I'm assuming early in the morning.
And I called a house phone, right?
Yeah,
It's not that you can put the ringer on silent. It was a home phone that is loud and obnoxious, and it wakes everybody up.
Yeah.
And that's, people going to answer that. You're right. And I can imagine our family was always on edge when I was gone because I couldn't tell people where I was going. It was always at the drop of a hat, drop of a dime. When anti-terrorism units deploy, they deploy to an area of the world, and they're responsible for, say, 10 to 15 countries in that area. It's called an AO. And just like when all units get deployed, they're just responsible for a certain part of the world. So as if something happens there, we immediately respond. You're one of the first responding units, and we were. We were the first responding terrorist unit in that area to that bombing. And then my brother platoon went to Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, where the other bomb went off. It's similar to 9/11. The 2 towers got hit. It was planned. The 2 embassies got hit. It was planned. And we have units out there right now doing this. And, you know, I did that with Kosovo, Macedonia, times of civil unrest. I was in that company for many years. You're only supposed to do a 2-year stint there because of the amounts of deploying there is. It's very, just a high operation unit. And because they were starting this platoon from this company from scratch, I was the first platoon. There was a second platoon, and they've since built up to a brigade. They're huge, but they kept us non-commissioned officers, NCOs, around to help train up younger platoons to go overseas. So I did many missions overseas, many different deployments to a lot of those hot zones. We weren't in combat yet. There was no war. There wasn't Afghanistan and Iraq just yet. So we were one of the most highly deployable units in the Marine Corps. Infantry units are being trained for war. Reconnaissance was being trained for war, but they didn't have a war to go act on it yet. We were always in a combat situation and combat ready because it was occurring. The war was anti-terrorism, was terrorism occurring. And I did that for a long time.
And to bring this back to our mission, by you being able to talk about it, it's almost like you're building a template for veterans that are willing and able to share their story to get this out there. Because if it's in you, that can be heavy.
That's right.
And so for you building this, by using this example of storytelling, it's building a template that we hope others can hear this podcast and hear that they're not alone and hear that there are others out there. I know everyone probably believes that. I mean, Adam, at Veteran Services, as the Cape-Ann director, I'm sure you may see that all the time where they feel like they're alone, even though they know they're not.
I'd be very surprised if there was a veteran out here in our community that didn't feel alone at some point. When you return home, you know, you feel disconnected from the community. I know I felt that way. You know, when I first came home, I thought, you know, our communities don't care about veterans. And I couldn't have been further from the truth. But it was what was going on with me internally. You know, I kind of had my blinders on. I couldn't see all the other veterans in our community. I couldn't see the goodness in our community. I was only seeing the negatives, and I was looking for the negatives. So absolutely.
Yeah, it's a good point. It's just when we go through trauma, Adam and I both been to the Middle East, Iraq, Afghanistan, we had that camaraderie of a unit. And when you go through hard things together and traumas occur, when you step back and you come back to a civilian world, there's no camaraderie here. You don't have your unit with you. You don't have your squad, your fire teams, your platoon. We can isolate ourselves. No one's been through what we've been through. They don't understand. They're unsafe because at least with my unit, even in a war zone, and we've seen hell, at least you were in some semblance of safety because the man to the left and the right kept you safe. Now we're back here and we're alone and our back is up against a wall. We're in a corner. We're not doing things well in our lives. Maybe it's a marriage. Maybe it's as a dad, a husband, a wife, whatever it is. We're struggling. We're isolating ourselves. And we tend to feel alone, and we're doing it to ourselves. Especially me, I lacked language for the emotions inside. As Marines, we're trained a certain way. You're supposed to flip a switch in your head and just mission mindset, go and do it. Complete the mission. When you come home, our time frame, there wasn't much processing. They had chaplains. They did, I know they had probably psychologists and therapists, but in my unit, anti-terrorism, it was so macho, so alpha that if you said I struggle with something, you were seen as less than. And especially being a leader, a sergeant, a squad leader, you got to kind of step up and put this armor on the inside and say, there's nothing wrong with me. I'm Superman. And you guys look at you like that. So it's just all of this plays into a mindset that's kind of toxic, and it just keeps it all inside. And it wasn't till, I was 40 years old that I actually found my language. I have 8 of these journals filled out. That's where my language came. All of the emotions inside, I had to just start to write. It got my language down on paper. The storm came out on paper, and I found my language through writing for me. And everyone's different.
I think there's a cultural value, right, that we have as Americans. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Be a leader. We have that kind of alpha mentality. In the Marine Corps, it's only stronger. Be that leader. Be there for the other individuals in your unit. That's not wrong. That American idea of being able to pull yourself up, come to this country, build something for yourself. Those are things that we desire, those qualities we desire to have. But we overlook some of the consequences of being that, having that bravado. We overlooked, some of the negative consequences that we cause on our family. We talked about this before, the multi-generational trauma. Great. You can return home, put food on your family's table, provide for your family. But at what cost? By not taking care of yourself. And how long can you do that? And then what are we teaching the next generation on how to behave? Because we never address these other ideas. And how much better could we have been as a father, as a husband, as a community member, if we not only took this, ran with it, and became strong members, but we also took care of ourselves.
Yeah.
How much more could we have accomplished?
Yeah. He brings up such a good point, Adam. Just it's sometimes us veterans, we in the country needs young men and women to be trained a certain way to do a certain mission. It's what we were built on. The red, white, and blue is on the blood of soldiers of the past who have done this, all the different wars. It's just at what cost? And we build ourselves up a certain way. They train us a certain way. When we're left to come home, there's that struggle to get back into society. And we don't know the physical effects of PTSD. We just know something's off. There's depression. There's just a fog over us. There's addiction that comes with it. There's that struggle of the language to explain the storm inside of us. And we're bridging the gap here by providing language. We need human connection. We need that camaraderie again. Veterans miss that. And if they're isolated, if you're addicted, if you just got those ideas in your head that you're not enough, that's all lies. It's coming back and getting the resources that Adam and myself can guide people to, and just have a conversation. And for family members, every civilian, everybody in this community, there's something called secondary PTSD. That veteran can pass it down to family, wife, children, anyone who is a part of the mission that they went on. There's a type of support they gave. And so when that person comes back different, when you go to war, or even if you didn't go to war, if you struggle with PTSD, that lack of, I didn't serve, I didn't go to a war zone, so I have survivor's guilt. If that's there, it affects the circle around you, the aura around you, the people around you. And we want to provide resources and a language and a connection for people like that.
Yeah, I think a good analogy for this is, when we talk about bridging the gap, I think of it as like a puzzle, right? We're a veteran with a bunch of different puzzle pieces. There's so much out there talking about VA compensation, VA healthcare, the services in your community, the services over here. And we're just a piece of that puzzle. We're bridging the gap.
Yeah.
There's so much there, but you can't connect the puzzle unless you address some of the ideas, some of the things that people don't want to talk about. The post-traumatic stress, the mental health, any kind of trauma that was faced either prior to service, in service, after service, the depression, being disconnected from the community. So this is that one piece. Here's your community. Here's the veteran. There's that missing puzzle piece. Let's bridge that gap. Let's put those two together. And I think that's really kind of what the focus is here, is bringing some light to that puzzle and being that piece of that puzzle for hopefully at least one veteran to recognize, you don't know what you don't know. And we can be, if we can provide that one piece of that puzzle for one veteran to connect that piece and say, I didn't know that.
That's right.
And that was helpful.
Adam used imagery, which I'm an imagery-based person. It was we carried such heavy gear overseas. We just carried all the stuff we put on, from a Kevlar to bulletproof vests to the weapons, the ammunition. But also remember that heavy ruck we carried overseas on the wrong boots, which destroyed our feet. Just the pain everywhere we had in our neck, our shoulders, our lower back. But we came home with a ruck. We might have got rid of all that gear, but we have this this imaginary ruck. And just every issue and problem or trauma, it was a certain sized rock that people continue to put, or veterans continue to put inside their ruck. And you don't have to carry that rucksack anymore. All those rocks, and Adam was so good at explaining the different sizes and what they could be in your life, and how many different rocks do we have in our rucksack. And we want to bridge the gap to allowing people to use their words and language to let's take those rocks out of the ruck and completely drop that ruck, because that's a burden that nobody should have to carry. And especially wanted to talk about suicidal ideologies and suicide, that I know we'll get to it, the 22 a day, but every veteran out there, that suicide is not the answer. If you're having those ideologies, you're not alone, and you're completely important to us, and your life is meaningful, and every breath you breathe is. And come have a conversation, or allow us in, or allow somebody in with those resources to connect with you, so you can get that human connection and take the rocks out of the ruck, and let's drop the pack together. Because that's what it is. It's done together. It was done together in the Marines, whatever branch of service you were. It was always done together. It was team effort.
And there's so much more behind just the suicidal thoughts. A bigger picture is morbid thoughts. Are you having morbid thoughts? It's not maybe just taking your own life. It's thoughts of death. Yeah. Anything in between that spectrum of, homicide to suicide and morbid thoughts.
Yeah.
If you're having those thoughts, let's bring it up, because it's not uncommon for us.
No.
We may think it is, and we may not want to. It's almost like a cultural kind of, let's not talk about that.
That's right.
But it doesn't get addressed, and we can't take one of those rocks out of our pack unless we address that rock.
We saw darkness. We lived in darkness. We've been to war. And over there's a type of training and a type of fear, type of anxiousness that you're going to be killed. And guess what? You were trained to kill from the very start of your military life. In war, there's death, and it's all around you. And so that fear of your life being taken, but also people fearing to take someone else's life, or actually doing it when you see people in death over there. When you come home, again, there's an impulse. We have an impulsiveness at times, in this 0 to 100 anxiousness or anger. Those thoughts are still there if you haven't processed them out. If you haven't gone to your therapy, or whatever fits how you heal, whatever modalities is chosen for you. There's no one size fits all therapy. And for me, it's a combination. It was a combination of meds from the VA to help balance me chemically. It was trauma therapy, and it was I've tried 5 different trauma therapies till I got to my last one, and I've been with her over 3.5 years. It's not a one size fits all. And it's also the physical therapy of me being in the gym to move the energy out. And it's that well-rounded and balanced person, not one way or the other, extreme one way or the other, because a lot of us veterans can be extreme. And it's just bridging the gap to having that conversation, saying everything out loud. What he just said, what Adam just said, is even homicidal to suicidal. There's so much in between there. And it's good to just say it out loud.
As a family member of Dave and Mark veterans, talk about bridging the gap. Again, I was young, but still you were in the Marines for quite a while. It's like I knew there was this heaviness in the house, or I knew there was this energy in the house. But talk about bridging the gap. We didn't talk about it.
No.
We didn't bridge that gap, And so, and at the time I understood. Dave and Mark are just doing things that I don't understand or can't understand. But I don't even know if you realize you did this, Dave. You wrote an action statement with our mission. And we accomplish our mission by gaining an understanding of the path these veterans walked.
Yeah.
The family members of the veterans, what did they go through? And the surrounding community members, through storytelling, education, relationship building, and just human connection.
Yeah.
So just to bring this all full circle, as far as that gap comes in a lot of different facets, but a piece of it is just an understanding
Yeah.
of it's okay to take off the ruck. It's okay if someone else is taking the rocks out for you sometimes. That's okay.
Yeah, and you brought up all these different types of therapies.
Yeah.
Human connection is a type of therapy that, I know a lot of individuals that think, you have to sit in a room with one individual and, hey, they're going to ask you, tell me about your feelings. Well,
Right.
that's not the only types of therapy out there. There's talk therapy.
Yep.
There's just social connection therapy. It's just, and it doesn't happen overnight. You try something, sometimes it doesn't work. You have veterans that try a type of therapy, and it's not the right therapy for them. And they're like, oh, I guess I'm broken and nobody can fix me and I'm going to leave and that's it. Well, no, that was just not the one for you. There's infinite amount of different ways to address this.
Yeah.
Let's find the one that works for you. And we want veterans on here to share what worked for them.
Yeah.
So maybe that veteran that's struggling, finding that right therapy for them can say, aha, I didn't even think of what Dave said or what Adam said or, what Andrew suggested. That might work for me. That sounds like something that's going to work for me. And that's the idea here, is to get all these different ideas talked about, get them on the table, talk about them, bring up some of these things that, we didn't talk about at home. We didn't want to talk about them at home. We still don't want to talk about them because they need to be brought up. They need to see the light so that we can begin to address these.
Yeah.
Because the things people want to talk about, typically the more positive stuff. We want to talk about, and that's a great piece of the puzzle, but it's a small piece of the puzzle.
Yeah.
We really want to make those two connections. We got to bring up some of this difficult stuff and at least put it on the table and say, this is what it is. Let's talk about it.
Yeah, I just love how Adam and myself are in the psychology field. I'm 2 classes from a psychology degree, and then I begin my master's in counseling, clinical psychology for yourself, or social work. And it's just, it's amazing that it feels like we've walked 1,000 miles. And for the veterans who just are not there yet, we understand we've crashed. We've had our mental crash. We continue to deal with post-traumatic stress. The Welcome Home Initiative group, which is a Veterans of War group I'm a part of, and we speak daily. We like to call it PTS, post-traumatic stress. We don't want to add the disorder part because we believe it's healable. We believe with all the tools that you're given and the connections, that well-rounded individual, that it doesn't have to be so extreme. And it can get to a point where if you're triggered or if you're feeling a certain way, having a bad day, whatever brings you back to that memory, it's just acknowledging with all the tools you're given, whatever modality of therapies you're using, that as life moves on, we can get through this together. Every day this group connects. I'm talking 7 days a week. We're back and forth in a text thread. Good morning, how you guys doing? And just to take that number, 22 suicides a day, down. Just so if someone's having a bad day, we encourage. We meet weekly by Zoom. We meet every 3 months with a retreat, and we talk about hard things. We go back into memories, and I've seen these veterans in their memories from Vietnam. I'm talking catastrophic traumas from Vietnam. Go back into these memories and release and heal. Release a memory, change it, and heal. Because sometimes for some veterans, they've been holding on to it for so long that when they finally say, I can't do this anymore, I'm taking off that ruck, and they go back into a memory. I've watched veterans sitting there completely stuck with everything, and it's just, you see them holding on to the ruck, and I watch them go back into a memory, and we guide them through the memory, and they released it, and it was a hard memory. And I feel like for those of us who struggle with PTS, it's those memories, it's those traumas we get stuck with. And releasing them is really important if we're willing to go there. And for some, it's just coping with it in healthy ways, not addiction, not alcohol, whatever the addiction may be, the lust, the drugs, the swiping, whatever it is on the phone.
Seriously.
Or just, it's got to be healthy.
I think one of the important things you bring up is dropping the letter D from post-traumatic stress disorder. And that's something that, we do with a lot of the disorders now. We drop the disorder, because they've become labels for individuals. Someone, you're not bipolar, you're not, post-traumatic stress. You're Dave, living with post-traumatic stress. You're this individual living with bipolar. You're not bipolar. That's not your whole identity. It's just something you live with. And how important that is to, again, drop that stigma of a disorder. It's almost like we've used it as almost like a disease.
That's right.
So, oh, stay over there
Yeah.
with your
This one has
disorder.
PTSD.
Yeah.
Don't
But
say anything around him.
But
Yeah.
you bring it more to light when you use a word like just post-traumatic stress, because it's a lived trauma.
That's right.
And we can connect on lived trauma. Most people have experienced some type of lived trauma, varying degrees of how it's affected their life. But most people have experienced some kind of trauma. Tell me one person in life that hasn't had
That's right.
trauma.
Everybody.
But that's how we connect. We find where we can connect over these similarities. For someone that may be struggling to understand our story of post-traumatic stress, and be like, oh, I can't understand them. I wasn't in the service.
Yeah.
Well, have you experienced trauma?
Mm-hmm.
Let's find that. It may
right.
not be identical, but maybe if you were in a car accident, you can understand that hypervigilance.
That's right.
That aspect when you get back on the road and you're like, oh, I hope I don't do that again.
Yeah.
Well, that's a little bit of what we're feeling to a degree.
Yep.
So let's find that commonality, and then you can say, aha, we can connect now, because I can at least try to understand what it is that Dave's saying.
That's right. The physiological effects inside our body is someone who's not a veteran. With their trauma, they're feeling a lot of the same things. Their war, although it's not a physical war in Iraq and Afghanistan, is a war of types inside of them. And I love how you said about the identity thing. It's like their PTS, their traumas don't define them. That's not part of their identity. That whatever it is, that car bomb, that firefight, the death you witnessed, the death that occurred, that doesn't define you. That's not your identity. It's something that was a part of your life, and it's now a memory, and it could be a stuck memory inside of them that's just being packed behind a wall, packed behind emotions, behind a stronghold. And for me, my healing was being able to tell a story. When I went into trauma therapy, I was able to take that storm inside of me, everything that was packed behind so many bricks, that I was able to take the bricks one by one down and tell a story. Every single trauma, because I was able to, through journaling, just, 1 through 50, like this, I just feel like, how many cuts at war are there? How many different memories can there be? You're there for some of the army men who were watching 18 months, like they were doing 18 straight months. I ended up counting. I did 4 years, 108 days just within the borders of Iraq and Afghanistan. 4 years, 108 days within those borders. And every day you're there is a hypervigilance. Every day you're there, you feel like you're in a prison cell. You just flip a switch and go into mission mindset, in the fear of death, the fear of incoming, the fear of going out onto the roads, the fear of when you're actually putting on all of your gear to suit up, to go on a mission, subconsciously knowing what could happen to you. And it's like I'm putting armor on the inside. Every time I'm putting something on the outside, something is going on the inside to protect from my fear. I can say it now. I was terrified at war. I couldn't do it then because I wouldn't have been able to function. But now looking back, when I actually said in therapy, I was scared. She goes, yeah, you were at war. You're supposed to be scared. It's scary. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. It was like convincing me. I was like convincing myself I wasn't scared, but I couldn't. I had to be trained and operate just like Adam did with our platoons. We could not show that type of fear over there because we had to do the mission. We had to get through it. And a lot of the veterans are still dealing with that. In society, they might not feel safe, and they still have this internal armor on, hypervigilant. Wherever they're going, are they going to a grocery store or avoiding a grocery store? Are they going to bars or clubs? And again, that hypervigilance, I don't feel safe around anybody because of what they've experienced.
Well, it's almost kind of like an opposite of exposure therapy. You use exposure therapy to numb. You tell that story over and over again until it becomes numb. Well, you had to do that in combat. You had to go out there, be fearful to the point that every time you went out, you had to be a little less fearful because you had to do the mission. So then your body kind of learns this, maladaptive behavior of, I have to put on that armor again every time I go out. So you talk about the disgruntled veteran. Well, is it that armor that they had to go out there and kind of numb themselves to everything going on around them? And now, their bodies learn this. I have to be numb. I have to numb everything out. And they have this armor on, and they don't know how to take it off. And we need to at least address that.
Yeah.
How do you take this off? How do you go from this area of conflict or trauma, learn this maladaptive trait of, trying to forget all that fear, forget all that pain, forget all that, and then drop it and be able to connect with people.
That's right.
And to connect with your world again. and how much brighter the colors are once you're able to put that down
Yeah.
and say, wow.
It's perfect because what you're saying is sometimes we are messed up. Our circuit board of a brain, the synapses and the connections are just not connecting. He just said it perfect. Every time we did a mission or there was incoming or something, you had this adrenaline, you had this chemical rush. And each time overseas that's occurring, your body is it likes that feeling. It becomes addicted to this adrenaline. When you're doing it over a long and prolonged time, it's called allostatic load. And it's basically screwing your chemical system up because you can't function like that long term. You're chemically now messing yourself up. Your connections in your brain are being trained one way. And so us coming back into civilian world, we don't know this. Chemically, I'm all messed up. I'm addicted to adrenaline. I'm not receiving it here. The burnt out circuit board in my head that was exposed to so much trauma is now, how do we reconnect the brain? How do we help you chemically? And this is bridging the gap. Some of our veterans right now are chemically messed up. They're unwavering. The circuit board in their head is just not connecting right. That's a problem. And they don't even know they have it. I have it. I had it. And it's just little by little through what I've been doing in therapy and talking is making those connections over a long body of work in a period of time, making those connections and getting chemically back to some semblance of equilibrium. And that was really good.
And that circuit can be burnt out, but it's a replaceable circuit.
Absolutely.
We can pull that circuit out and put in a new one.
Yep.
I think one of the important values here for our veterans, though, is recognizing that doesn't happen overnight, regardless of the modality that is right for you. You mentioned it. For the men and women in the Army, they did it for 13 months. You can't go to one of these sessions of counseling or anything and expect to ominous be healed. You have 13 months of this behavior that you learned, that your body learned. It's going to take at least that, at the bare minimum, to unlearn that trait. Your body's used to this now. It wants that. You mentioned it. It craves it.
Craves it. Yep.
It's got to relearn a different path. It's got to rewire those neurons to look at things differently, and it doesn't happen quickly.
That's right. And I think some of us get into therapy and want that instant fix, and it's not.
It's a more societal
thing, right? It's just it can't be done. Like, we trained and did something for so long with part of something. This is now not. It's not untraining. Our training will always be there with us. I mean, it just carries with us. That's what makes a veteran, I feel, special and needed in society because of the training we got in boot camp, all the way to carrying out 4 to 5 to whatever, how many years they served. They're a productive member of society. We just, over a long period of time, just have to get that brain working like it's supposed to, and just if people are messed up chemically, just find the right doses. That's not on us. That's on a psychiatrist to do that. But it could be all these different things. But come connect with us. The resources you're going to bring up that we're going to go over.
And that's, I think, a good part of this as well, is that it's going to take time and it doesn't need to be done alone.
Right.
In fact, I would say, Adam, we've talked about this in your experience, and more often than not, it's the connections, the human connections that help bridge that gap.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So for anyone that's looking for a few bridges, I just have a few bridges here. Call the Cape Ann Veterans Services office, schedule an appointment with Adam and his team if you're looking for just a one-on-one appointment to talk to somebody to gather some more resources. 8:30 to 10 a.m. every single Friday at the Cape Ann Veterans Services office is a coffee social. I went there as a civilian and loved it. I absolutely loved just talking with some of the guys, having a great time, or gals. And this was actually before the football, the big football game. So everyone was jazzed up, and it was just an amazing energy, amazing people. And if you really need a big bridge, there's the Veterans Crisis Line. So you can go to veteranscrisisline.net, and you can text 838-255 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. veteranscrisisline.net. And Adam, you brought up something really important yesterday about, it used to be Veterans Suicide Line, is that correct? And they since changed it to Crisis Line.
Yeah, because again, you see a small group of people that will say, I'm feeling suicidal, right? So if you were outside that kind of mindset of just thinking I'm suicidal, but there was something else going on, you're like, oh, that line's not for me. Well, when you open it up to a crisis line, it's for anything, any kind of crisis you're feeling. If you need immediate assistance and it's a call that's going to help you for that moment, make that call.
Yeah.
Make that call.
And I've used that line. My crisis came, and they guided me into the VA where I needed to be to talk. If you need it, the crisis can be anything. I don't know why my body feels like this. I don't know why I'm struggling. I did so well in the military, and now I'm back in the civilian world, and I'm not fitting in. I'm not excelling like I used to. My body is not working like it used to. Why am I feeling like this? Again, we have the language for that, but if it's hitting you hard, you make a call and let them guide you in. Don't be afraid of that. That stigma, that us saying, I just don't need help. I don't want help. Well, it's in you, and it's coming out in some way. You're coping in some way. It could be numbing. It could be numbing with addiction. You could be screwing up in your life. Like I said, in any facet of your life, it could be as a husband, as a dad, as a brother, as a sister. The connections with your family are not working. It's coming out in anger. Where is it coming out? We want to guide you to those resources, or you can advocate for yourself. Make that phone call, and just have those therapists, those psychologists, those psychiatrists speak into your life. And it's this long-term plan. It is not short-term plan. And sometimes that's hard for us to hear, that it's going to take a little while. Sometimes we struggle to get past the day. Sometimes it's minute to minute. And veterans in that place, that's hard. I've been that minute to minute, hour to hour veteran where, wow, why is this so painful? I would rather go back to war because at least I knew I could function there. But this internal pain that I can't see the wounds, they're internal. It feels like I'm internally bleeding out. I don't know what this is, but there are people who can guide you through that process.
And even just to build off that, I remember when you were reaching a breaking point with everything going on in your life, and you threw us, your brothers, a bridge too. Remember, I was on my way to work. I was still working at Cranny, and we all met at Mark's early in the morning. And that's when, for the first time, we realized what was going on.
Yeah, I had to open up and share with the people closest to me. I'm different than I used to be. Something's happening. I don't quite know what this is. And I shared it with my 4 brothers. And it was hard for me because you just act like a Superman. You just put on all this armor in your civilian world. And it was the most vulnerable and open I had ever been, and said, guys, I'm not in a good place. I'm hurting right now. And it was me, again, stripping off a little bit of that armor, dropping at least a piece of the ruck for now. And I need a lot of help, and I don't know what that means exactly. And so it was just every day, little victories. Sometimes we lay in bed long term. You just wake up. Let's make the bed. Something we did in the military. Just do something productive. And it's little small victories that over time it's just kind of producing a healing road.
And as a family member, it's not being, because I remember initially there's this initial like almost fear, but then that fear transitioned into just a love for the individual and just wanting to help. So the family members just this isn't just for veterans. As family members or community members listening in as well, love the individual. Don't fear what they're going through.
Right.
Like going back to what Adam said, you're David Nicastro dealing with PTS. Yeah. We love David Nicastro, and we're going to do whatever we got to do to help you. And look how far you've come in just a few years. And a few years in the grand scheme is not a long time. Yeah, it's been a lot of work to get here, but you're doing so much better.
Thank you, brother.
Yeah, of course, man.
Love you, man.
Love you too, man.
I think when going back to the crisis line and it's kind of just the trauma itself, one of the things we have to recognize with veterans is this false mentality of saying, I'm not going to call because somebody else needs it more.
That's good.
Somebody else needs the counseling more. Somebody else needs a crisis line more. No, it is there to help you. It is there to help all of us. No crisis is too small. There is no such thing as a small crisis. It's your crisis. It's as big as small in your world as you make it. So it will be addressed by them. And if you need that help, if you want that help, it's there for you. Don't feel like you're leaving it there for somebody else. You're almost having the opposite effect.
That's right.
We have this conversation a lot with veterans that want to leave some of these resources on the table for somebody else that needs it more. You're almost doing a disservice for veterans by not using these services for yourself.
That's right.
One, you're not helping yourself. Two, you're putting this imagery onto our communities and kind of some of the not so great stuff we want to share about veterans. Right? You're in people getting this false image of the veteran, the negative side, or
That community.
the darker side of the veteran. That
Yeah.
you know. And lastly, if you don't use it and you're leaving it there,
Yeah.
who's using it?
Who's using it? Yeah.
If we don't use these resources that are available to us as veterans, at some point they're not going to be there because like, oh, no veterans need it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there are veterans that need it, and it's there for all of them.
That's right. And we're left to kind of, if we're not using it, we can start to die away inside. You know, you just internally, the longer you don't receive your help, you start to kind of melt away inside, and you just continue to isolate, continue to remain hypervigilant, and continuing to chase whatever it is they're chasing, and you're getting lower and lower. And no matter how low you get, you can always come out of it. No matter how low you get, you can always come out of it. Suicide is definitely never an option. I know they want to end that pain. They want it to go away. That's when you're calling a brother. That's when you're using that crisis line. That's when you're needing to really, at that point, connect with Adam, connect with myself, connect with connect with people at the crisis line. You need connection. You need connection. You just can't isolate. You can't be alone in this. You got to do it together.
Which goes back to, which we briefly talked about this, but I want to take a second to really talk about it, is the number 22. This is getting released on the 22nd of every month for a reason, because, and this is actually from what Adam was explaining, this actually is probably a lower metric, but the suicide rate that we have is 22 veterans per day are committing suicide. And that's 22 too many. So going back to our goals here is to, if we can even adjust that number down a little bit, it's all worth it.
And it's across the spectrum, right? It's not just one generation of veterans. It affects the full spectrum of veterans out there. I'm assuming a lot of folks out there probably assume it's our generation.
Yeah.
It's not. It's, it includes the Vietnam generation, the older generation. And most people would say, well, they've been home for 50 plus years. Why would this happen now? Well, you look at where they are. They're at a life-changing point in their lives. They're retiring from the workforce. They're seeing their friends or close relatives pass away with age. They're seeing their own finite existence as they age. Health concerns are developing. They're empty nesters. Their children have moved out. All this changes in their lives are rekindling some of these things that they've been able to suppress for so many years. And now it's coming back to the forefront, and it needs to be addressed. Some of them are great in addressing it. I think that helps culturally, that we are able to talk about mental health a little bit more, but some of them are still under the assumption that, no, this is something I have to manage on my own. Well, it's not something you have to manage on your own. And that goes for our generation too. You talked about medication within the VA, and there's such a stigma around medication. There's this kind of false notion that, all the VA wants to do is throw pills at veterans. Well, if the medication, no, they don't want to just throw pills at you. But if the medication can at least bring you down to a stabilization form where you are kind of a baseline that you can then begin receiving these other treatments, well, that's going to help you. If you can't function without this medication, you can't begin this treatment. So there's a purpose for this medication.
Absolutely.
And if it's going to help you, use it.
Right. And that's my story. I just chemically was crashing, went in there, and they gave me high doses of certain medications to bring me back to that point. Now I'm on the very two lowest doses of the medications they got me in order to receive my therapy over long term. He said our generation, we were in a 20-year war, creates 2.5 million veterans who came back and are needing mental health. When you lose a war, when you pull out of a war, Afghanistan and Vietnam vets became best friends. I was going to them going, how did you do this? And you just start second guessing everything. The friends that you lose over in those parts of the world, you're like, what was it for? It was amazing. The men in the group I'm a part of, Welcome Home Initiative, the Vietnam vets, came right alongside me and said, this is going to really hurt. And you're right. That sucks. To pull out and to lose a war is really bad. And you're right to ask those questions. What was their sacrifice for? What was our sacrifice for? You come back with all these issues from war, and you're losing families. You're losing what you thought was forever. And it's really hard, but they said, we're going to do this together. And that was just a beautiful thing in this group to say, you're not alone. they were even getting triggered back to Vietnam based on what happened in Afghanistan. And we needed to do it together. We came together and said, we're hurting. We feel like we've been betrayed by a country and a government and an ideology, and this really hurts. And it's even the civilians can get this. They were all on TV watching it happen and felt betrayed. Or with everything happening with COVID and the state of the world and country, everybody's on edge. Now with a veteran who's been to war, it's just, wow, is it amplified? We just feel off. And guess what? It's okay. It sucks right now and it feels off and we don't feel right. Let's do it together. Let's talk about it. Let's bring it out into the open and discuss it.
Yeah, I think Afghanistan's a hard thing to talk about, right?
Yeah.
When you look at Afghanistan and what we had hoped for and what we got. When we look at what was it all for, I think, one of the things to look at is that we gave, the country at least 20 years of
That's right.
some kind of future, especially the women.
Yep.
Especially the women. And this is really kind of me looking forward positively.
Yeah.
But, I hope we planted a seed with them. If nothing else, they had school, they worked, all these things that the Taliban denied them, just their basic human rights and dignity that the Taliban denied them.
That's right.
We had a whole generation of Afghan women that grew up with these freedoms that, you and I fought for and so many of our friends died for. My goal is hopefully that, again, that ignites them to say, we've had enough. We had a taste of what life should be, our value as women. I have 2 daughters, I see, that value, and I hope that what they have, that the Afghan women can have. And you know what? It's still new. It's still fresh. And with any kind of fresh, especially negative fresh, there's a fear. There's a fear of life. Because everybody asks, why did all the Afghans, or so many of the Afghans try to leave the country? Yeah. Well, there's a fear. There's an onset fear of your safety, of your well-being. And, we have Afghans in our community that have resettled here, trying to make a life, that have left their families back in Afghanistan. At some point, that fear is going to turn into that aha moment. Like, I want what I had before. I want that. I want to be treated like a human. I want my country back. And I want to learn and be part of the workforce. And that's what I think we hopefully left with them.
That's right.
But, it takes time.
Yeah.
It takes time to get over that initial fear of everything that just happened. And at some point, I hope that they turn around and say, nope, no more. We're done.
Love your positivity's optimism, because you can talk, you can go into a rabbit hole of thinking of all the negativities, but it's so right that we can remember going on the roads in Afghanistan, of Kabul and wherever you went, and seeing the girls holding the books and the bags and going to school and knowing that in 20 years they were getting degrees, master's, doctorate degrees. And when the ruling force came back in, when the Taliban came in, it's just completely crushing them. The seeds are planted. That was provided by America. It was a 20 years of a certain type of life that people never had an opportunity for, didn't have the freedom to get. They had that in 20 years. And we see what's happening in Iran, an uprising, and it's a strength of women saying, no more, will you do this to us? That we don't want to follow that old school Sharia law where it's the men rule the day and the women are crushed. And that's in Afghanistan too. It's happening. They're crushing them. And they're smart women who have degrees and had freedom, and those seeds are planted. We don't know what the future holds, but it can be loud over there. Those women can have a voice and be loud. And I see it happening.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's something similar we talk about with veterans. You don't know what you don't know.
That's right.
And they didn't know anything different, unfortunately. Again, there was a whole generation of women that grew up under Sharia law, under the Taliban, and that's all they knew. And in their mindset, whether they agreed with it or disagreed with it, which I'm sure they all disagreed with,
right.
But that's all there was in life for them. It's not like they have the internet. They don't have TikToks. They don't have all this social media platforms.
Thank God they don't.
Where they can see, it might benefit them
right.
for
to have that exposure.
See how life should be, or to a degree it should be better for them. Yeah. They would have never experienced that if we weren't there. They wouldn't have known anything different. And then they got that taste, like you said. They realized their value, their worth, the human nature that they deserved. And they got a taste of that. And at some point, they're going, no more.
It's just, this right here is therapy. Just us like processing what happened in Afghanistan. For a veteran to hear, Yeah, you know what? When we pulled out and I felt like this and I exploded inside and I went into a dark place, my head did this, the thoughts, the movie reel went somewhere else. Just talking about it and getting it out is therapy. Knowing that what I physically felt inside is okay. How do I give language and process what's going on inside? And that's what this is. For me to even say it was hard to watch people die and to know that people died for this mission that we pulled out of made me angry. I got frustrated. I went to a dark place and felt this way, but I didn't get stuck there. I had to do therapy and process it with brothers of the Welcome Home Initiative, Vietnam veterans who said, I feel the same way. Let's get through this together. And just talk about the optimism of 20 years of freedom. It just kind of gives you that hope. And sometimes that's what some veterans who are stuck, they lack hope. They lack just what's in front of me. They lack the hope. And this is what this is. It's hope, bridging the gap to give you hope and to see a light.
Yeah. And, of course, we have kind of a free-form style, but also a storytelling style, an education style with this podcast that we're building here, with ultimately, again, the goal of reducing that number 22, trying our best to do it. Anyone that needs help, providing resources, bringing in organizations. We talked about that we can bring in some partnerships or some other organizations, interview them, talk about what they do. Yeah. And any veterans that are listening in or family members that could lovingly guide those veterans to be able to find the resources and help. So we are coming up on an hour. Did we want to give any closing thoughts or
just talk about it? Like, we want veterans, that are willing to share their story to come on and talk about it. Yep. Tell us how what's going on with you, or what you've perceived, or how you live, or obstacles you've overcome, obstacles you haven't overcome yet. Let's bring it out, because again, you're not alone, and there's somebody else. If you're feeling it, somebody else is feeling it. And if you can talk about it, maybe it's not any of us that have this idea. Maybe it's a veteran that was willing to come on, and another veteran watching this that says, you know what, that experience is my experience. And if that veteran can say, this is how I worked through that. That's how you solve some of these problems. It's not all the formal educational side of things all the time. It's talk. It's what worked for you, what didn't work for you. If something seems to connect with you, it's about connection. If you can connect with one person, that is a game changer. It's one of the reasons why we form the coffee socials. If people can connect, it worked. It was perfect for COVID when we couldn't meet, because you had all these veterans coming together for the socials all the time, and they needed that human connection. And then the world took away that human connection. Well, they had already built some of those bonds. So when you started going down that rabbit hole of dark thoughts, people were checking in on each other because they formed those connections. Hey, Andrew, just calling you, check in. I don't feel great today. Just want to see if you're feeling. And then that at least helped people through what we had to go through over the last couple of years. So that human connection, the importance of telling your story, of finding that connection, is vital to the larger picture of healing.
I think just Adam said is talk. Veterans, what questions do you have? Veterans with no language, what do you want to say? What do you want to hear us say? Community, parents, family members of veterans, what questions do you have? What do you want to hear? What is your veteran going through? Myself and Adam just want to walk alongside people, veterans and families, to just guide them through the hardest parts of their life and the hardest times of their life, which could be now. And just kind of bring the traumas to light so there's healing happening, so people can be a productive member of society, to build up this community. That's what we really want. We don't want veterans to be in the dark and alone, and we don't want them taking their life. Again, it's just your life means too much, and you are meaningful to us, and we care about you. So help us also with what you have for questions and what you want to see and hear us talk about.
Yeah. You don't know what you don't know. And if we can bring it to light and answer it, things that worked for us, things that didn't work for us, and everything in between. Let's talk about it.
So whether it's joining a community at the Veteran Services Center every Friday, 8:30 to 10 a.m., feel free to just walk on in. Even if you're a family member of a veteran, or if you're just a community member and you want to be a part of that veteran community, great group of people. I highly recommend it. The Veterans Crisis Line website, I literally just pulled it up. So if you want to call in, dial 988, then press 1. There's a 24/7 chat right on the website, or text 838-255. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Or you can call, if you're just looking for some one-on-one conversation with someone local, call Veteran Services. You can talk to Adam's team, schedule an appointment to go in, whatever it is. There's resources out there that are available for all of you. So this is our first Bridging the Gap podcast here, gentlemen.
I think it went well.
Yeah, we did it. Awesome. Well, thank you all so much. We appreciate you all for tuning in, and I will see you next month on the 22nd.